Yep, we are going with just the audio. I'm not sure what happened to the video. I've got video on my end, but it is not coming through on our screen. So, hey, we're gonna work through with the slides, and I'll have those all up for you. So that's coming through at least, and we'll kind of walk through our topic, which is the nature of evil. So we're picking up with yesterday's topic, and that was a challenging one as we sought to define evil and we saw its existence, and we looked at some statistics about how people perceive evil today. And I think one of the interesting ones was that 80% of people, as they perceive evil, do not attribute that to God. So they don't blame God for the evil. There's a good portion, I think it was about 60%, that blame the devil for it. And then it goes on down as we accept lesser and lesser responsibility for the evil that is in existence in the world. But 80% do not blame God. We also saw that in those statistics, about 10% did not believe in God. And so that would make up, I would imagine, a good portion of that, a part of, at least a part of that 80% that does not blame God, since God for them does not exist, would make sense. And so we're going to look today at the nature of evil and kind of the problem of it as well as we look at that. Because how people understand evil has a lot to do with how they understand God also. And so we wanted to look closely at that. And we're going to start right with a this, I would say it's one of the second real descriptions of evil. So we had the first description of evil coming within the Garden of Eden, where they had the tree of the knowledge of good and evil that existed right within the center of the Garden of Eden. That's where the forbidden fruit was. God warned them, don't eat of this tree or you will die. And Satan, about 60% of the people would blame him as a result. And I think we can give him a lot of credit for this first lie that tempted Adam and Eve to eat of that forbidden fruit and ultimately to know evil. Now, if you remember, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that had to do with they had already a knowledge of good. They had no idea what evil was, and so this would open their eyes to that awareness. And we looked at their disobedience as being their first introduction to that. So they were tempted to disobey or distrust God in what he said by the devil. When they ate that forbidden fruit, their disobedience was made manifest, and they immediately knew evil. Now, something that's important, I think, in understanding the nature of evil is understanding also its intimacy with which we know it. So when they ate this fruit that looked tasty and desirable, and they, for gaining what they described as wisdom, or was described by God as the knowledge of good and evil, that knowledge was something that they were going to possess intimately. Okay, like what we use that word to know someone, oftentimes means within a sexual, there's sexual connotations like that. He knew her intimately. And that's the way we know evil. Evil is something that doesn't just affect us on the outside now, it's something that we have within us. And that has a lot to do with how we understand the nature of evil as something that's not just on the inside but on the outside, or not just something on the outside that we perceive existing or happening circumstantially, but something that actually comes out of people, comes from within. And that we want to talk about. And we see that happen. The second occasion in which we see that happen isn't just their disobedience in the garden. We actually witness evil becoming manifest in the murder of Abel by his brother Cain. We see that immediately play itself out. So they knew evil, and they became even more intimately aware of it, or keenly aware of it, when they saw how the brothers now fought, and how one killed the other. And so what they wanted, they got. And be careful what you wish for. is maybe a lesson that we can learn just from that simple occasion. But the word evil shows up a second time, and that comes when we don't see it just playing out within the small, intimate family of Adam and Eve and their two sons, Cain and Abel, but now we see it having grown in scope and encompassing all living people on earth. Okay, so the family has expanded, it's grown. We see a table of nations that's kind of broken out as we see Cain's descendants, and we see the descendants of Adam and Eve through their son Seth, and both lines growing and the population of the planet increasing. And then with that increase in population, since that awareness or understanding or keen knowledge of evil now exists within each person as it's passed on from generation to generation, finding its origin back to the garden, the original sin. We see that now in its full scope, being such that God doesn't tolerate it any longer. And he decides or chooses to put an end to it, and he's going to wipe off every living creature from the planet. And he's going to do this by virtue of a flood or a deluge, that he's going to cover the earth, drown everything, and then start over with the small remnant that he preserves through that. And that's Noah and his family. So Noah's wife and his three children, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their three wives. And so 8 people in all saved on the ark, preserved through a flood, and made to. Now, what was the reason or motive behind this flood that would encompass the whole earth and cause such great devastation, which we might describe as a natural evil, even though it was a God event, an act of his judgment? Act of God, as we might describe that. Well, here's a word from Genesis chapter 6, verse 5, and this is where God is making known to us his reason, his rationale for destroying the earth. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Only evil continually. So God wipes out every person on the planet, brings about a cataclysmic judgment, but preserves his creation through the ark, as not only Noah and his family are taken in, but all the animals that are taken in 2 by 2, and they're preserved through that. And they stay on that ark for about a year, and then they come off the ark, and in celebration of their setting foot on dry land again, Noah offers a sacrifice. And this sacrifice is pleasing to God. And this is how he receives it. And when the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma, the Lord said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground because of man, for the intention of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I ever again strike down every living creature as I have done. And so this is God's response to the sacrifice. He receives it with thanksgiving. He pledges that he's never going to do this that he has just done in destroying the earth. But the condition of man really hasn't changed. While Noah was a righteous man with regard to his faith and trust in God, his acknowledgement of God, he was also still corrupted as a result of Adam and Eve's fall into sin. What they did has been passed on all the way through into Noah and now into his family, and all of them carry that with them onto the ark and also off of the ark. And so while we have a smaller population, we still have a population that is corrupted by sin. So this is the existence of evil before and after the flood. Now, philosophers have really tried to study this. They've really tried to understand what is evil. How do we understand it? What does this have to do with anything? Does evil really exist? And if evil really exists, does God really exist? And that's what it really comes down to. And so there have been various attempts to define it. It starts out with the most basic, which would be there's two types of evil: moral and uh, natural. And then others have gone so far as to say, well, there's also the moral, the natural or the physical, and then there's also the metaphysical. And then others have gone, and I thought this was interesting. This is put out by Lars Svensson in his book, The Philosophy of Evil. He writes about four different types. The demonic, which is natural, which is intentionally desiring harm of another. Okay, so that would be the demonic evil. That would be Satan tempting Adam and Eve, knowing very well that while he tells them they're not going to die, that they're going to die, and he's going to be the one that instigates that. And so there's that demonic evil. There's an instrumental evil, which is kind of a side effect of trying to do something that's good. So you might be, an example might be hauling a tanker full of oil, petroleum products, to from one place, point A to point B, and there's an accident and it spills, and there's an evil that's a byproduct of an intended good. And so that's instrumental evil. Idealistic evil would be the end justifies the means. So I may have to perform some evil, but it's worth it in the long run because it'll accomplish a great good. And some examples of that might be Hitler, who maybe thought that he was doing something great in providing a super race of people, or Osama bin Laden, who was purging the unbelievers from the earth, I guess, or bringing about judgment. So idealistic evil. And then there's stupid evil, which is really just a result of incompetence. So, we just do stupid things, and we bear forth stupid results. So there's one attempt, Lars Svensson. I think he gets a little bit too complicated in it. I mean, there's some usefulness in the discussion of it, but I'd rather keep things simple. And so I go back to just the basics. You've got the moral evil and you got the natural evil, and the natural evil really is a consequence of the moral evil. So they all really flow from just the one evil, but they manifest themselves in different forms or different ways. So let's look at that again from the perspective of just the definition of evil. Okay, so this shapes our view because people are concluding whether or not God exists based on whether or not they understand how they understand evil. And some people have gone so far as to just say evil doesn't even really exist, that it's all perception, but it's just different perceptions of good. So from one, it's like two opposing teams on a football field. Because they're opposing and they're competitors, one sees the other one as the enemy, and they're fighting against each other. But really, from one vantage point, you have ultimate good as victory, and the other vantage point, you have ultimate evil, and that's defeat. And that's how they perceive everything, is just very simply that. We also see within even the school systems the efforts and the trends that have happened, like the emphasis on morality that was taught in the schools, and just there was a standard that was conveyed from generation to generation, and then there was a point at which people said, no, you can't put your morals on another person. You can't force them to go along with that. And so they would try to be amoral, because if you put your morals on someone, you're automatically, anyone that's contrary to that is immoral or against those morals. And so in that case, someone might say, well, I think this is perfectly fine to do, and you're telling my kid in school that he can't do this, and that's wrong. You shouldn't be able to tell them. So they went from moral to what was then amoral, which is an absence of moral. So they just avoided all moral discussions altogether. And now they're back to that moral, except the moral is no longer from the Judeo-Christian uh, vantage point. Now it's a worldly vantage point. So the moral would be uh, having to do with a lot of things like the transgender topic that we talked about, and tolerance of varying beliefs, and really the only belief that's not tolerated is the one that says that those beliefs are wrong. Um, so there's a great discussion that has to do with what is evil, how we understand it. I mean, if that is wrong, that is evil, right? If that wrong affects the person to an evil end, that is evil. And so this is a huge discussion to have and to be able to talk about. So one of the arguments that exists from the opposing side, the world side, is that if God exists, then there exists a being who is omniscient, omnipotent, and perfectly good. And secondly, if there existed a being who were omniscient, omnipotent, and perfectly good, then there would be no natural evil. But there is natural evil. So they see these, and by natural evil, that would be things like a tornado that destroys a house and kills the people inside of it. That would be a natural evil, or earthquake, a tsunami. Those types of things that exist in nature and happen naturally, as we see. So, but there is a natural evil, and one could even go there is a moral evil, but I don't think that argument is necessarily made from this vantage point. But if you were to say there is also a moral evil where someone's rights encroach upon another, like my right to live encroaches on yours when I take your life. Okay, so that would be in the area of abortion. So if I choose to have an abortion, my life is superior to yours, and I have control over my body, and yours isn't living off of my body. Therefore, I have control over you, and I can decide whether you live or die. I would say that's a moral evil. Your life is encroaching on the life of another. So, anyways, the natural conclusion of this argument is this: God does not exist. Okay, if God is omniscient, knows all things, omnibenevolent, always good, and present everywhere, omnipresent, then if evil exists, then God must not exist. That's the conclusion that's drawn from there. I have a different conclusion, not surprisingly, that is drawn from the same sort of thing. And this is why philosophy is kind of a great way to have conversation, but doesn't really go anywhere. Because you have to establish an absolute. And if you don't have an absolute, you really have very little vantage point from which to have your discussion. So whether evil exists or doesn't exist, if you can't decide that, there's no way to have that discussion. If you can't define what evil is, so as to agree on that, it's very hard to define anything else as like what is good. And so here, let's work with the definition of the word that's used in the Hebrew Bible. And we brought this up yesterday, but the word ra means bad. Okay, so bad in contrast to good, or evil, and that goes to the natural or moral evil that we've been talking about. And that's how it's defined for us. It comes from the root word rea, which means to spoil, okay, or something that goes bad. So you might have some bread that was good when you bought it, but you didn't eat it in a timely fashion, and as a result, next time you pull it out, it's gone green. And that's not that it's good for the environment. It may be good for the environment. It's just not really good for you because it's all moldy. So this bread that's gone green has spoiled. Literally, what that means is the breaking to pieces. And figuratively, symbolically, how we understand that, what that means, to make or be good for nothing. So once it's broken, it's not good for anything. You know, like if you had a vase and you dropped it and shattered it into a million pieces, it'd be very useless in terms of carrying water or holding plants. So the idea of it being broken to pieces as being bad, it's no longer good for what it was intended. Good for nothing, physically, socially, or morally. Now, this is an important starting point. So if we define evil as bad or good for nothing, or this is the one that I really like to latch onto, broken. Broken implies that it's no longer working the way that it was intended to work. Okay, so if I get a piece of equipment and I'm trying to do it, like, for instance, I had a chainsaw and I was sawing up some logs, and I got through it, and all of a sudden the chain stopped spinning. There was something wrong with it, and I had to take it apart, and the sprocket on the end had stopped spinning. It must have gotten gummed up with some wood. I've never had that problem before, by the way, but it wasn't working, and it was no good to me if the chain didn't move. And so if the chain didn't move, the blades on the chain never engaged on the wood. They never cut the wood, and so I could never get through the wood to make them into decent log size, so I could split them and then eventually burn them. So the whole process was broken as a result of that brokenness. That was evil. That was evil. I had a job planned. I had time allotted to accomplish this, and it wound up I was unable to finish the job. I have to admit, it wasn't because of that problem with the bar sprocket. It was it ultimately became a problem with what we'll go back to Lars's definition of stupid evil. Because my incompetence, I accidentally took the chainsaw apart while having the emergency brake engaged, which created a whole nother issue, and that took too long for me to complete my task. So that was stupid evil. So we will use that. But basically, we're looking at evil being of any kind, whether it's stupid evil or anything else. If it's broken, if it's not working, that's not good. It's not good. And so if we go from that vantage point of defining evil as brokenness, we can see a broken relationship in the garden. So that evil that exists there that they knew of, they had disobeyed God. There was a separation that existed. A chasm now divided the unrighteous from the righteous, the obedient from the disobedient. And it would soon be manifest by the separation from paradise to this fallen world in which we now live. Okay, so that is bad. That was bad. And that badness, that brokenness, continues to show up every day in a variety of ways. And so if we look at that, then this is the conclusion. So as they would look at the argument and say, well, if evil exists, then a good God cannot. I would say the brokenness that is demonstrated through evil, that is brokenness, shows that there is also a design, that there was an intention. There was an intention that it should work this way. And when it doesn't work this way, it's broken. So the intent of that way it's supposed to work shows a design. The design presupposes a designer, and the designer is God. So if we look at all of that, we see that it ultimately points us back to the way that it's supposed to be, and that it is not. Evil shows us what it's like to be without, to have a vase that's shattered into a million pieces, to have a life that's constantly incapable of accomplishing the basic tasks that it was supposed to do. And this shows up in the brokenness of our lives in both moral evil and natural evil. So the basic things that we should do are no longer things that we do. So I think that here, from my vantage point, I would see the evil showing brokenness, the brokenness showing intent of how it was supposed to be and is not, the intent showing that there was a design or a plan, and the design showing evidence that there was a designer or someone who put this plan into motion. And this is the way it was supposed to be. This is the way it is. And how do we get back to the way it's supposed to be? And that's where God becomes a remedy for us. So these are all presuppositions. So these all work off of a definition that sees evil as broken or breaking. Okay, so it can be actually, the evil may be in the breaking of something. So that those presuppositions, intent, intentionality, design, and designer, okay, those all point us back to God, whereas the other would look at the evil and see it as proving that God doesn't exist. So two opposing vantage points. Now here, from my vantage point, this is where our biblical worldview is so contrasted with the worldview of those who are not operating from the perspective of the Bible. Okay, one looks at it as no God, and the other one looks at it as no God. One is N-O God, and one is K-N-O-W God. And just as we all came equally to a knowledge of evil, now that evil has the ability to actually reveal to us a different knowledge, a knowledge of what would be good. And so evil makes us long for good, and God is good. So let's see how this is from Romans chapter 8, verse 28 through 39. For we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good. So as we come into this knowledge of a designer, we can see that he is in constant work. He who has punished, we're bearing the punitive evil of living outside of the garden. That's a result of our disobedience. And so we have that every day. Then we also have a God who loves us so much, who is so good that he has not abandoned us, but is still working for our good in the midst of that which is bad. So he desires to bring us back together with himself despite the great chasm that was self-inflicted by our disobedience. And so we know that those who love God, for those who love God, all things work together for good. So he uses these evil things ultimately to draw us back to himself and to accomplish his good purposes for those who are called according to his purpose. And let's keep going through, because he doesn't do this with the absence of evil, but in the midst of evil. For those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of the Son, in order that he might be the firstborn among many brothers.